Good afternoon. My name is Roger England. I've been a consultant with Lanner for about 13 years now, and I've been asked to present a webinar today on connecting witness to databases. The aim of this exercise will be to try and get more people to use this rather underused area of witness. I should apologise for the misquote on our website in the invitation to this session. We are not trying to link Excel to databases, but link witness to databases. If any of you choose to leave now because this wasn't what you were expecting, then I completely understand. But in the hope that I'm going to enthuse you for using databases more with witness in future, then I shall forge on. First of all, a few administrative features. As I say, this is the first of actually two webinars. Today I'm going to focus on bringing data into witness from databases, how we basically connect to external databases and work in that way. There will be another session next Wednesday on outputting the results of witness models into a database. We expect this to be about a 30-minute session. You can submit questions via the chat area on the WebEx screen that you should have in front of you, or if you want to raise questions later, you can always email us at support@lanner.com. Just in case anybody's unsure, you should see something at the top of your screen to allow you to set up the chat so that you can actually see it there. You need to send messages to the host of the session. So you select host, type your message in here, click send, and then a message will appear there. That way we can just see all of your questions. Obviously, you should all be muted, so we can see your questions, and hopefully I'll have time to address some of those at the end. So, why use a database, or possibly why not use a database? Witness has typically been interfaced to Excel, and we have very rich functionality in that area. But there are some areas of managing data which are rather difficult in Excel. For one thing, the data and the user interface, the management of the data, everything from the colours to the layout, is all in one place. You can't separate the two. I think some people probably find this a big advantage, and certainly we all use those sorts of facilities in Excel. But the ability to actually separate the data and use different user interfaces and apply different business logic is one of the real strengths of database work. Where there are formulae relating one thing to another, they're not at cell level. So you're not repeating the same formula over and over again in a big column of data. It's also not possible to overwrite one cell with perhaps you have a formula in a single cell. It's not possible to type over that accidentally in databases. Also, the way that the data has to be, I think the word is fully typed in a particular way. It must be either integer or text or whatever. To actually put that kind of validation into Excel takes a great deal of work, and to make it really robust and check the logic, it's a lot simpler in databases. Databases tend also to be more multi-user than Excel. That's not always the case, and it's not always a problem in a lot of cases. I think a single user Excel is probably just fine. But databases do tend to be scalable. They can start small, grow big. They can be really almost as big as you like, whereas Excel does have some limitations. And particularly you need to pre-size Excel spreadsheets to take the data that you require, whereas a database you can just pull what you need. The hardware and the applications around database servers, if you're using remote servers, corporate Oracle servers and things of that sort, they will tend to be very robust hardware that's optimized for doing exactly that, rather than a general purpose laptop that is trying to do games and Excel and other things. There's a wealth of reporting tools that you can sit on top of databases both web-based tools, or indeed you can use Excel as a front-end reporting tool on top of a database, but you have a great deal of choice rather than trying to do everything in Excel. Size I've just mentioned, and also the fact that, as I say, cell level formulae are repeated over and over again throughout a spreadsheet, so the performance does tend to deteriorate as your spreadsheet gets bigger, whereas with a database that's much less of a problem. I would say that operating Witness with a database is not mutually exclusive with Excel. There's no reason why you shouldn't use the two. I would advocate quite strongly using the strengths of Excel and its the integrated user interface and so on for putting data into a Witness spreadsheet, a Witness model, but maybe using it for the data coming out. One other thing that I should mention, it's not always necessary to install the database software itself. You don't actually have to have Microsoft Access installed on your laptop to be able to get data out of an Access database into Witness. So you can be pretty flexible. Some examples of databases, Microsoft Access I've mentioned, and that's probably the one that most people have fallen over or had access to. Microsoft SQL Server is used quite extensively in a lot of businesses. We do ourselves here. Microsoft Azure SQL is a cloud-based database. It's basically a Microsoft SQL Server out there on a server farm somewhere in California, and I'll maybe show you a little of that in a while. Oracle, the big daddy of databases, perhaps. MySQL, a free database that is used to support many wikis and things of that sort. These are the sorts of different range of database providers that you might see on a typical laptop. That's a screenshot taken from my laptop yesterday. One thing that I hope is to try and dispel a lot of people's almost fear of using databases with Witness. I think there's a lot of jargon and a lot of technological stuff that gets in the way, and one of the things that we come across is OLA drivers and ODBC, open database connectivity, in terms of this sort. We could spend a lot of time talking about them, but I think in reality you don't need to worry about them except when you actually have to connect your Witness model to the database. Once it's set up, these things mostly run themselves, and as I've said, they're mostly very stable. They're designed to be reliable and work in the background. So as I say, I'll hopefully jump through that and dispel some of those myths and fears. Within Witness, we have a number of functions for connecting to database, for opening a database and also closing the connection to it. For moving around a record set, so after you've pulled in a set of data and it's held in the memory in Witness, you can move around that, move up and down the table, detect the end with things like database EOF is end of file. There are functions for moving data from the record set into integer, reals, and string variables, within Witness. And there's also one or two other functions which I'll just touch on today for how you can explore the data. So the first of those, dbopen and dbopenx, these are two functions in Witness. They both fulfill the same function. dbopenx tends to be used for OLA connections and dbopen for ODBC connections. I tend to find that they are almost one and the same, and I frequently find that I've actually used the wrong one, so it's probably not necessarily to sweat this too much. Open, as I've mentioned, means opening a record set. It's not just opening a connection to the database, it's opening a record set and pulling a set of data in. So you need to provide a data source, that's the connection where you would like to get the data from, but you also need to provide a SQL statement. I'll come back to that in a second, which is a request to pull some specific data from the tables in the database. You may have to provide a user ID and a password. I put an asterisk against DB open. That's where those are often required. But if there's no user ID or password set for the database, you don't need those. The other two parameters which are required for the DB open function in Witness are a cursor and a lock. In reality, I think we nearly always set this to 3 for the static cursor and 1 for a pessimistic lock, which means that when you grab the data, nobody else can have it until you close the connection. Yes, in reality, we use those almost all the time. There are other options there, but I shan't talk about those anymore today because these are generally pretty reliable and robust solutions. The other thing that we need to know about DB Open is that it provides a value, it returns a value to a variable which we call the handle. And basically, if the handle equals 1, you've had a successful connection or a successful operation on the data record set. If you get 0, then it tells you there's been a problem. So I'll just dive quickly into a Witness model and show you some of this in action. In these models, I'm using the user actions for the demonstration. Just by the way, all of these models and the Access database that we'll be using today are all going to be made available to you after this presentation. So we would typically have a DB open X function is used in this way. So handle equals DB open X. We have a provider data. So what technology are we using? What's the name of the database? Perhaps some security information. And then critically, we have the SQL statement that says what the data is that we require, and then the cursor and the lock at the end. It's handy to put in a little check that if the handle has failed, then we put some kind of a message up, or if it's succeeded, then we get success. Just to demonstrate what that looks like when you run it, we get a little message that says success. So we know that we've connected, and we know that in the background we've actually pulled data from the database into the memory. What we can't see is the data itself, and we need to then move on to try and moving that into some variables. I'll flick back to my presentation and talk about that those data source strings in a little more detail. I think I'll probably do a blog about this and try and dispel some of the complexity of this. But a data source string typically has 4 components. We have a connection technology. We have the server and database, as I saw in the example. It was an Access database. This is actually listed from accessing a Microsoft Azure database on the cloud. Because it's a cloud-based technology, there's more password information that's required, and occasionally there are 1 or 2 other parameters of this sort. These sections don't need to be in a particular sequence, but it does help to be methodical. And there are various ways that the string can be generated. One way is through the ADO link which Microsoft provided, which is something that's brought up when you're creating a database module in Witness. We'll come back to that again in a moment. You may actually be able to get the string from your host or wherever the database is being held. If I flick round to my Azure, thing, if I look at my Azure control panel, so this is my database on the internet. There's a little thing here saying show connection strings, and that just gives me the ODBC string that I can then paste straight into my Witness model. I just have to put in the password and make sure that all the security settings are okay. But that's not terribly complicated. If I go back to my presentation, I've just put some examples there of different types of connection string. As I say, I think I'll skip this and put that in some kind of a blog or something. If I go back to Witness now and move on to a slightly more complicated model, as I was saying, I've defined the code to pull the information from that particular connection and pull it into my witness model. But it's often easier to work, rather than working with a long DB OpenX statement with a great long string, it's often easier to break this down into two sections. One is the connection provider, so you can then edit this, maybe change these manually if you like, and also the SQL string. You can then build those together. There's the connection provider, there's the SQL string, and then the lock parameters at the end, and a check to see if it's opened. So this model will get that record set. Then having got the record set into memory, we can then use this function, move first, goes to the start of the table that's in memory, and then while we are not at the end of the table, we can then cycle through, incrementing 1, 2, and using this move next function. So we go to the start and then record real value. So we're moving data from our data set, our record set in memory, into a parameter which I've got two variables, vi part and vi time in. And at the end of that, it will tell us how many have been imported. If I run that, you can see that's reading the data from the Access database. It's resizing the dynamic variable as it goes, and you can see 2,166 records have been imported. If you are used to pulling in data from Excel, I'm sure you'll find that was extremely slow going. So a smarter thing to do, if I move to this model, is to actually estimate how many records we need to pull in first. So same procedure, we have a connection provider string and we have SQL select statement. Here, this is pulling in a simple SQL statement, select count as count rows from arrival. So that's really saying count all the records that are in the file and give me a number which is called count rows. We can then use that down here to set the dynamic variable size. I've got a print statement in there to say how many rows it's going to import, and then it can do the same procedure as we had before, DB move first, move next, link round. But this time we're not having to resize the variable as we go. And I think you'll find that that is considerably quicker. So if we, just to reiterate, if we check how many records we're going to pull in first with one SQL statement, we can then redefine the SQL statement further down here. That's exactly the same statement as we had before in the previous model, and then resize automatically beforehand. Just a few notes on structured query language, SQL. It isn't as hard as it seems. There are whole thick books that you can read about SQL, but really for working with Witness, there are a limited number of things that you actually need to learn. It's rather like not having to learn the whole of the Witness control language in order to make some models. There are any number of cheat sheets on the internet. If you just put in SQL cheat sheet, you'll find several of them, and we'll probably make one available at the end of this session somehow. But it's only required also within Witness to actually get the data into the memory. We can use, as you can see here, select star from my table simply means get me everything from a table called my table, or I might just want to have two particular parts from the table, or I might want to filter it, I might want to count things. This is possibly as complicated as you're going to get. This is just grouping parts by part number and coming up with the average of time in and pulling that in. Most of what we would call the database work after that is actually not working with the database, it's working with the record set that's in memory. I'll skip round to the Access database that I'm using this just briefly, just so that you can see. This is a table called Arrivals. So this is an arrival profile. It was actually generated by another Witness model. So we have a part and we have a time that the part actually comes into the model. So I'm using the analogy that we might be trying to pull in some kind of an arrival profile for use. And we have an experiment number and a dummy column, and as in most databases, we have an ID column as well. So as we're pulling that data in to Witness externally, you can see that that data has been pulled in. We've only tried, if I go back to the statement, I've only actually been pulling in part and time from that database. Moving on to sorry, there's one more thing I should mention here at the bottom. I didn't introduce this earlier, but it's very good practice to include a close statement. You should really close any table once you've got the data out for various reasons, but most particularly because somebody else might want to get to the data. If you're only working on your own database, then probably you can skip it, but it's a good habit to have in the first place. I'll just very quickly go through a couple of other things that you can do with Witness database functions. This model, if you care to download it later and look at it, I'm thinking here that there is a field in the table in the database, but we don't know which one it is. All I know is that the time is in a field that starts with a T. So this simply pulls in and it uses field count to check how many fields there are in the table, and then it walks through the fields one at a time using the DB field name function to detect which one is the one that starts with the T. So there, if I run that, it says, we've got the field is called time in, so I'm going to put that in my time in field, and it's pulled in the 2,166 records. There's another function that relates to that, which is actually detecting what type of field it is before. So if you had a set of tables, you can actually use the database field type. So you can actually detect whether each field is text or real or an integer, and you can actually use that. I won't run that for now because I think we're going to run out of time. In my database, if I get that back up, apart from having my arrivals in that way, I also have another arrivals table where if I sort by part, you can see that I actually have, so part 99, there are actually two records, part 99, in there from different experiments. So supposing we want to actually bring in the average, or we want to bring in one or other of those into our Witness model, we need to be able to filter them. And this again is simply just down to how we configure the SQL statement. So here I'm using an input dialog to control this, but if I want to pull in just the items from one particular experiment, then I can filter things in that way. And here I'm looking at the count that I have to do at the start. If I scroll down, then there I'm pulling in my arrivals profile as an average, or I'm pulling it in from a specific experiment. So here, for instance, if I run this, it asks me which experiment to use. That's pulled in all the records from one experiment. If I rewind that and run it again and pick experiment 2, you can see there's actually a different number of records. It wasn't 2,166, it's 2,160. If I rewind that again and run it and input mean, then the other SQL statement kicks in and it pulls in the average. So you can actually see that those, or you could see if it was zoomed out, you could see that those were the averages of the two experiments. Apart from actually doing the filtering in Witness, so defining that SQL statement in Witness itself, it's also sometimes more efficient to actually do the averaging at the database end. So I can, for instance, define a query here, which those of you who are used to looking at Access databases, you can see I'm taking, I'm grouping by part, and I'm taking the average of the arrivals, or if you're used to looking at SQL, That's a handy hint, by the way. If you want to generate SQL statements, you can switch from access mode to SQL mode and then cut and paste that for use elsewhere. That gives you that particular result. So this model, if you use it, instead of defining the SQL statements itself, here we simply say pull from the query, and for the user, for the witness user, a query or a table are effectively one and the same thing. So all the hard work of doing the filtering or the summarizing, averaging or whatever is actually done back on the server. Going back to my statement about the servers are usually optimized for doing this kind of thing. So that can make things a lot easier. Plus, if there's a particular summary that you want, you can perhaps get somebody else to write the query and file that on there. So that works. Sorry, I shouldn't be running that. I should be running the user actions. Number of rows to report and read successfully. Those of you who have been using witness and databases for a long time are probably used to using the witness database wizard. If I go back to my presentation, the witness database module is defined using a wizard. You simply define it, build the connection string, which you do through this build button, add a SQL statement of your design, and that will then save in the model. It will create a series of functions that summarize all of those, all the witness database functions that you need to use. I'll just show that on the model. That creates something that looks like this. So I've created a database module called Access Import, and that's read the table, and you can see it's put in my dummy column, experiment, part, time in, and it's created a series of its own functions, such as open records, which are using the dbof, dbopenaccess, and it's wrapping all of those up. That was created by that build function. Those of you who've ever done this will be familiar with that. The thing that you would typically do then is you would build those, how you build all of your activities into a function. As I say, I've been using the user actions just as a way of making this a little easier, but here I've built it into this particular function here. So that's walking through again, moving the data from your records. But we're using here load current, which is where is it there? That's one of the functions created by the witness wizard, rather than using the DB open statements and so on. So that works. That works as well. If I run that, I need to actually run that. Sorry, I would, for instance, call that function from the initialize actions if I was actually running this as a proper model, and behold, that walks through and reads successfully. The downside of using that module is that you can only actually have one SQL statement per module without actually having to hack it around a great deal yourself. It does add some additional error checking, but it does create a load of functions that may not be required. So, for instance, in the model, you've got functions for find first, when maybe you don't need to do find first as well as last record or first record. It clutters things up, arguably. The witness functions I've listed down here. You can see dbopen, dbopenx that we've discussed. These are the functions that are created by the wizard, and you can see that which functions are used in which places. In several of these cases, such as open records actually references load current, so it actually pulled all of these in there. That's what the asterisk implies there. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm actually running out of time. So the next section that I was going to talk about, error handling, I think I will have to roll into the next session next week. I'm glad to see that not everybody has left, in spite of the fact that we didn't talk about connecting Excel to databases. I just skip forward over over these. I will try and put that in a blog or some message. I was just going to go through how you can debug your connections. It's the connections to the database that usually fail. So some resources that we'll offer for you. The example models and the database, as I say, will be posted online somehow. We've got your email addresses, I believe, so we'll be in touch in the next few days. Obviously, look in Witness Help for some more information. There is a Lanner blog. I think I have that open. If you go to the Lanner website, click on the blog, and there you can see various things. And who's this good-looking guy here? You can see I've recently been putting some more blog items up on this area. We're doing quite a lot of work in this area now. The support portal as well has a number of things. Those of you who are used to using the support portal, you'll find solutions in there as well. Under interfaces, you can see various things, use of ODBC links and Witness and so on. My Lanner YouTube channel, I think this will be posted on the YouTube channel soon. As already mentioned, you can contact us at support. Going back to the connection strings, there are websites that just tell you all you need to know about connection strings, and probably more besides. By all means, look up Microsoft for their definitions on OLE, DBC, and OLE. SQL cheat sheets. There really are. There is only probably one page worth of commands that you really need to know. And one of my particular pet hates, where Excel gets used for things that really should be done by databases. I've got some horror stories that we found on the internet. So next week, connecting Witness to databases for purposes of outputting data. So where you're generating large amounts of results, putting them in the database so that you can then do some thorough reporting. The only other thing I should say is that if there's more information that you'd like about this area, then by all means come along to our user conference. If you go to the website, you can find details there. The conference is it's on the 25th of March, so book early. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with it, and I hope that you develop the same enthusiasm for Witness and databases as I do. Any other questions? As I say, if we've not answered anything there, we'll get back to you and copy you all on those as well. Thank you all, and good night.